All right, so good afternoon, and thanks to everybody here in the room for showing up and braving the rain, and welcome to everybody online. My name's Rebecca Graves, and I'm the education librarian from down at Health Sciences Library.
And my name's Janice Dysart. I'm a research services and science librarian based here at Ellis.
And so today we're going to be talking about maximizing your research identity and impact. And I'm going to start out and just, excuse me, I'm going to start out and just state the problem a little bit. I'm sure you've run into it, which is running into people with similar names. How many of you have run into other people with a name similar or the same as yours? Okay, seeing some hands up in the room. Is that person actually in the same discipline, or are they? They're a different discipline?
No, okay. I got mail to that person, mailed it to me.
Oh, you got mail coming to you from another person, but at least they're in a different discipline, right? Okay, because we've actually run into it where people have both the same name and the same discipline, and that's just kind of wild. So, and then also there's cultural differences with names. I have relatives in Puerto Rico, and I'm like Graves Garcia, and so I always have to stop and think which part of the family is Garcia, which part is Graves, which is Graves Garcia, because it's not as familiar to me. And so we, as the world gets smaller in a way, it gets harder to kind of track names. And then people change names for various reasons and change institutions. So one of the ways that we recommend maximizing your identity is to use the ORCID. And how many of you actually have an ORCID number? Okay, so 2 people in the room do. And so you have a handout. So you should either have a paper handout if you're here in class, in the room, or you have one online. And actually, before I go, I'm going to have you all go to ORCID, but I'm going to actually do something real quick. I'm going to go look up an article. So I'm looking up an article because I want to point out, because it's easy to say, well, having an ID is one thing, but what does it look like out in the real world? So here is an example of an article on conservation in Galapagos Islands. And if you look at the first author, they have an icon after it for their identity. And so it gives them identity, and at the bottom, it actually shows their ORCID. So you can see how different journals are actually starting to either require it or encourage it. Even if you're publishing books or book chapters, they'll ask you if you have an ORCID number to put it on there. So some places you're going to be asked for it. It may or may not be a requirement. And it can also help you identify people. So if I click on that, this will actually take me to ORCID, right? Yeah. I call it ORCID like the flower, but then I misspell it because it does not have an H in it. So this takes me to that author's ORCID site. And you can see he shows his other ID numbers. It shows his employment, where he got his education, funding he has, the number of work. So it's a quick way of finding or viewing other scholars and other researchers. So if you haven't already gone to ORCID, type it in. And there I go, putting in the 8, but don't put in the 8. So it's really easy. And so we've built in time today. So if you're here, most everybody doesn't have an ORCID number. So go ahead, go to orcid.org and register for an account. So we'll actually do this right now. And as you're filling in, I'll just say that ORCID was started in 2012, so 7 years ago already. Kind of hard to believe that. And it's called a PID, or a persistent digital identifier. That's actually for you as opposed to your articles. And it's been supported by a lot of different foundations and universities and publishers such as CERN, the Wellcome Trust, MIT, University of Barcelona, Cornell, Nature Publishing Group, etc. And so you can use this to identify yourself. And the visibility, you'll see the visibility setting as you're filling in. You can actually set that for different parts of your record. It's not an all or none. It's not like your record's public or not. It's like you can have different pieces set on them. And if you manage a lab, or if you think you will be managing, or you plan on managing a lab in the future, this is something that you could have your graduate students or your potential graduate students do, because that way they'll be able to get a head start on managing their careers. And then you can also follow them through their careers and see what they're doing. And because that's a ripple effect of impact, because none of us get to where we are alone. We all have help and assistance. So this is another way to kind of give shout outs and show connections between people and to not lose track of things. I'm going to take a quick look to see how far people are on the login process. If you've never logged in for an ORCID number before and it's asking you or any of these other people you can actually just say no. You don't have to go look through. But if you have done an ORCID number because yours broke or you forgot, or maybe for some reason you need two, I'm not sure why, but it could happen. You would want to go through or if you forgot, or maybe your institution created one for you or a previous institution and you want to merge them, that's when you would grab it. But if you've never created one before, you can actually just say, no, these people are not me. Okay, it looks like most everybody here in the room has gotten pretty far into getting their profile set. So you do have to, register for it on your own. You have to put in your name and your email and if you put in a biography or a bio, those you have to do manually. A lot of the other pieces you can ask or to go out and try to pull. When you want to update, I actually pulled up one of our faculty, Sergey Kopikin. Now, if you want to add in additional works, there are some institutions that work with ORC where they'll actually have them up there automatically, and then you can click on those and have it search for you. Now, depending what field you're in, if you're in humanities, the MLA link might pull in well for you. I actually had a book chapter come out, but it wasn't in there, so I don't know if it's because it's new or because it's health sciences, but you can put it in manually, so that's what I did. So they prefer if there's an automated piece on here that you do the automated, but if not, you can put it in manually. And so depending on what you're publishing, whether it's journal articles, book chapters, etc., or if it's in different disciplines, you may rely more on the manual than the automatic. And the automatic, my understanding is you have to go in and check your record and update it. It doesn't automatically just pull and update it and you come in and say, oh, look, it's been updated. I think,
That's my understanding.
yeah, I mean, it's kind of semi-automatic, that you go in and you check, click on the links to say, go search for me, and then it'll pull it in. Any questions on ORC and why we just had you do that? Okay, so from ORC. Okay, so one of the folks in class was saying that she'll get emails from ORCID saying, hey, there's updates available if you want to accept them. So they do flag you. So thank you, that's good to know. So, because I try to get some publishing in, but as the librarians, we don't do that much. So, so it's good to know. Any other questions, comments about ORCID before we move on? Before we do, I just want to point out, so here's Sergey's. So again, it's similar to the other researcher I had up with the employment, education, and the works. You can see that Sergey has more ID numbers. Loop is profile, that's from Frontiers Media, which is a publisher that focuses on open access science journals. So, you might have other ID numbers that you want to put up there. You may not. It all works for you. What works for you and your field, because a lot of it's field dependent. And then if you have any websites, if you have a Mendeley profile or a Wikipedia profile, you can have them linked here. So this kind of gives you a basis so that you have your identity and the credit of your work comes to you. So that, now I'm going to turn it over to Janice, and so you can close any of those tabs.
Okay. Let's start. Oops. I was just going to open a new window with this thing.
Oh,
My-
grab it up here from you pull it down.
Okay. Sorry about that. Technical problem. Okay. Since we're streaming this presentation at the same time, there's a little extra stuff on the screen. I'm going to just go briefly to the library website. I wanted to show you that we do have a guide for our workshop. And the address should be on the handout that we gave you. On this page, if you just go to services for and go to researcher support, we've got a lot of nice links on this page that might be useful for you in the future. But today we're looking at maximizing your impact, and that's this box down here. And we're looking at researcher IDs to start with. So this is kind of the handout. So it'll go over even more stuff than what we're talking about today. But as you can see on our researcher profiles page, there's quite a few other profiles you can set up. I mean, ORCID is the one that's really the standard as far as journals and databases are concerned, but there's some others. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the Scopus author profile. Is anybody familiar with Scopus? Does that word mean anything to you? What is it? Nobody's going to go into it. Okay, Scopus is one of the big databases the library subscribes to. So I'm just going to looking for a database, and I'm going to type in Scopus. It is, it covers all disciplines. It's primarily an article database, but it does actually have proceedings in it and a few books. And it goes back to about 1970. It covers about 23,000 journals, so it covers a lot of journals. And one thing it does is it automatically sets up author profiles for people. We're just going to look up Sergey again. Oops. Oh, it thought, oh, sorry. It thought I wanted to search for ORCID, but I didn't. Let's get rid of that. Huh. Okay, I just wasn't using Scopus correctly. I thought the search button applied for the whole form, not just the ORCID. Okay, if you're, well, this is the author listing for Scopus. You can see he's written 85 articles. If you've written at least 2 articles that are indexed by Scopus, Scopus will set up an author profile for you automatically. And to see the profile, you click on the author's name. And let's put a little bit up here. And you can see they list his ORCID, affiliations, subject areas, variations of the name. So you can see he's published under several different variations of his name. And then how many articles he's written, total citations. If you come further down, you get the list of articles that he's written that are in Scopus. And let's come up, and I should say the Scopus ID is something that's automatically set up for you, so you don't do anything. Scopus does everything, but what you should do once you start writing articles is that, like, maybe once a year, you should go into Scopus and check to see if they've got the information correct. Because Scopus does the best they can, given the information they get from the journals. But occasionally they do make mistakes. They'll assign an article to you that you didn't write, or there's some articles that are not assigned to you that should be. And they do have, they've got some links. Like up here at the top, there's a link to edit your author profile. And so you can click on this link and it sort of takes you through some steps and allows you to edit your profile. And it may be you need to change your affiliation, but usually it's articles. And I have helped people fix their articles. In one case, a person had written some articles and it was a journal that was covered by Scopus, but they didn't have those volumes. So I was able to contact the Scopus people and say, why aren't these volumes in here? Because Scopus does go back to 1970. And they added them. So Scopus is willing to make updates. They want this to be as accurate as possible. And you can actually, MU has a subscription to Scopus, and so we can easily get into it. But you can actually go view your author profile without having a subscription to Scopus. You can just Google author profile Scopus, and a free link will come up that you can click on and look at your author information and make sure it's correct. Because Scopus is one of the major databases that researchers are using to find research. So you want to try to get your information as correct as possible in here. But they're doing a better and better job of doing it. So chances are you won't have to ask for corrections very often.
And this is Rebecca, and I'm gonna jump in here and just amplify what Janice just said, is that depending where you go off to for your careers, your university or institution may or may not have a subscription to Scopus. They might have Web of Science, which is a competitor. So that's why it's good to know that even if you don't have your university doesn't have a subscription, you can still go in and check your profile to make sure that people are finding you and that you're getting credit for the work that you've been doing.
Any questions on the Scopus author profile? Web of Science is another major database, which actually we have a subscription to that. Web of Science does not have its own automatic author profiling system. So they don't act quite like Scopus. They've got something you can put up, but it's really for your own personal use. It's not for other researchers to look at and get information from. So, well, notice on this page for Dr. Coplican, there's a box that says H index 22. Does anybody know what the H index is? Anybody heard of that? Anybody else? One person has. It's a fairly new metric. It was, I forgot it, about 10 years ago, a physicist in Spain decided he wanted to create a metric that indicated both the productivity of a researcher and the impact of a researcher. He wanted one number that would do both things. And what this is telling, he came up with the H index. His last name is Hirsch, so that's where the H came from. The H index for this researcher is 22. And what that is telling you is that he has written 22 articles that have been cited 22 or more times. He may, as you know from this profile, he's written 85 articles, but only 22 of them, which actually is a pretty good number, have been cited 22 or more times. You can go to these databases like Scopus, and in a minute we'll be looking at Google Scholar that has the H index in it too. You can compute your own H index. Once you have articles written, you can make a little spreadsheet of your articles and look up how many times they've been cited, like in Scopus or Web of Science or Google Scholar. And then you rank them by the number of times they were cited. And then you just start going down the list. And when the number of times cited is, or when the, well, let me show you the illustration from my, oops. Oh, I think it's going to drive me crazy. I've actually got a little example on my spreadsheet that's easy to look at, or on the guide. So this is if you're computing somebody's H index, you've got your own, actually, it's probably what you'd be doing. You just put your spreadsheet in, ranked by the number of times the article's been cited, and then you start counting down. And when the number, when you come down and the number of the article is less than the number, or well, the number of times cited is less than the number of the article number, then you want to go back. And the time cited has to be equal to or greater than the number of articles. So this person's H index would be 6, because they have 6 articles that have been cited 6 or more times. Now, if the 7th article here gets cited 2 more times, their H index is going to rise to 7. So over time, your H index should go up. And certainly when you're starting, if you've only written 1 article, your H index can only be 1. So that means it's all relative. So you can't, I mean, whether having an H index of 6 is good or not is all relative to what field you're in and the length of time you've been in the field. So this person would have to compare their H index of 6 to other researchers in the same field that they are in and that have been in the field about the same number of years. Because you can't compare yourself with somebody like Dr. Coplican, who's been in the field quite a few years. And he's in physics. I think 22 is probably a very good number for physics. It also depends on the field that you're in, how often people cite work in your field. Some fields, people don't cite each other all that much, so having a low H index may still be pretty good. It's all relative by how long you've been in the field and what your field is. And all it is just a metric to look at a glance and sort of see how you compare to others, equivalent people in your field. And it seems to be sort of catching on because more and more databases, and you're seeing it in more places. So it's something just to be aware of. You don't really have much control over it other than to continue to write articles, get articles published, and hope people cite them. And that's how your H-index will go up. Oh, maximize the value. Okay. We're just here. Okay, any questions about the H-index? Okay. That stands for the last name of the researcher who came up with this metric. His name is Hirsch, I think Hirsch or CH. So it really has no meaning other than the researcher wanted to put associate his name somehow with his metric that he came up with. And it's always written in lowercase. Yes. The high, he's asking about, but the higher your H score, certainly the better it is. But as I said, you can't, as far as how you're doing at that moment with whatever H index you have, you really have to look at other researchers in the field, in your field, that have been in the field about as long as you have, to see whether you're higher than most of them or the same or a little bit lower. But certainly the higher the H index, the more, it's certainly indicating that you've written more articles and that you're being cited. And certainly some people have pretty high H indexes. I'm not sure I've seen any over 100, but I'm sure there are some over 100 if you're really a prominent researcher. Yeah, we'll have to Google that after class, see who's got the highest H index so far. Okay, since we're on let's go here. Since we're on metrics, I'm going to spend just a few minutes on another group of metrics called Altmetrics. Has anybody heard of Altmetrics? It's kind of short for alternative metrics. The most traditional metric that's been used for years to indicate the impact of research is how often an article is cited, or a book, or any kind of item, how often it's cited. That's been the standard for many, many years. And about, I think it was less than 10 years ago, with the advent of the web and some of this much stuff happening on the web, some people came out with, well, let's start measuring sort of the social mentions of articles in research. Let's start counting that up and seeing what that looks like. So that's what Altmetrics is. It's measuring, maybe how many times your article is downloaded at the publisher website, or how often it's mentioned, how often people are tweeting about it. It's usually mentioning how often it's covered in news stories, just all sorts of things that you can find on the web. And it's still not, it hasn't been established yet whether these metrics are going to really mean anything to you. I think personally, as a researcher, you'll probably find them interesting to see who's talking about your article and how many people are viewing your article. That's certainly interesting, but whether it's going to kind of become important to the people that hire researchers or decide how you're going to be promoted, that's still being determined yet. But let's look at an example. We've got, there's two main companies that are collecting all this statistics, and one is called Plum Analytics. And in our search box, we have a Discovered in You, our little search tool called Discovered in You. It contains Altmetrics from one of these companies. And let's do, I'm just going to put in a topic search just to pull up some examples. You know, you can put in the name of your own article. If you've written an article, you can search by title or just some subject terms to pull up some articles. And notice this first item is a book. And see this colorful graphic here. It's called Plum Metrics is the name of the company. I don't know why they came up with that name. It doesn't really mean anything, but that's what they're calling themselves. And the bigger these little circles are on this spoke, it means it's color coded. And if I mouse over it, you'll see this little pop-up box. I can actually click on it and get a bigger screen that'll give me more details. But like usage is green, and you'll see those green circles pretty large. Yellow is, what is yellow? Yellow is mentions, and what they're considering to be mentions are Wikipedia, Goodreads, Amazon, and so forth. So you can look at this little basically dashboard, and you can see sort of what's happening to this article. I mean, this book. It's actually a book. It's got mentions and how much people are using it. So it's kind of interesting. They do this with articles too. This is just a particular book. And this is the Plum Analytics company. I'll show you one other. Let's do this. We'll do one other company that's doing this, and it's called Altmetrics. And I think that company must have been the one that came out first, since they got the Altmetrics name as part of their company name. And it's in a database called Dimensions. Dimensions is a freely available database that came out about a year and a half ago. And I'm going to just go briefly into it. And I'll do let's do this. I'm just going to pull up an article that I know has a lot of activity, social activity about it. And actually, this article was written by a professor who used to work on this campus. That's true, based on how much they published, they probably did. And it's this article here, this third article, plants respond to leaf vibrations caused by insect herbivore chewing. And notice again, there's some color here, and Altmetric is basically done the same thing. They're also using color to indicate usage. And if I click on this, I'll again get a big screen. You can see these people are competitors, and they've got some similar stuff. And only they use kind of a wheel and swirls and color instead of a spoke. And they do news outlets, and you can see this one. They give these scores, which personally doesn't mean much to me, other than the higher the score, the more activity there is. And they said this article is in the top 5% of all the research outputs scored by this company. So this article has had a lot of social activity, and you can see down here a lot of tweets and other things. Now, there has been a little research done that seems to indicate that tweeting does seem to increase how often your article is cited. That the research is preliminary, so there's nothing definitive yet. So definitely people are starting to research Altmetrics to see if it really is indicating much. As I said, right now, it's probably mainly personal interest to sort of be able to see what's going on with your article, because it takes a long time before an article is cited and shows up as, in the cited references. But this kind of stuff, this social interaction, is going to appear as soon as your article is released. So So it's something to be aware of. It may become more important. I might mention one other thing. Some publishers are getting into this too. I'll give you one example. Windows web browser. Okay. There's a publisher called Plus One. I'm not quite sure how they pronounce their name. They're a big open access journal publisher that they've become very prominent, very important. Let's see. Again, I'm just trying to pull up an article that they published that has a lot of action, just so you can see. Okay. Now this is the article on the publisher website, and you can see right at the top of the article, they've got a box for a tab for metrics, and over here on the right, you can see they summarize the metrics. Like this article has over 500,000 views, 827 people have saved it. The saving, you know, maybe a little more of an indicator of people really using it. I mean, because anybody can sort of view it, but you can click on the metrics and take a look at them. So more publishers are starting to give you the number of article downloads for sure from their website. So it's just something to be aware of. It may be something, you know, if you have an article that's being downloaded a lot, you know, and you're going up for you know, promotion or just some kind of raise, it may be worth drawing attention to your supervisor, the people ahead of you, that, you know, this article is getting a lot of attention, even though it may have just come out and there hasn't been time for it to be cited a lot yet. So basically keep Altmetrics in mind. I think as you go on in your careers, it's probably going to become more and more prominent. Any questions about Altmetrics? If not, I'll turn it back over to Rebecca.
All right, so before I jump into my section, I just have to say it's philosophy for the win on H-index because Michael Foucault had 280. So philosophy for the win. I would not have expected it. I would have thought it would have been biology. But and keep in mind, I mean, you could run and try to, you know, metaphorically run and try to say like, oh my gosh, I got to get an H-index that high. But I don't know. It all depends where you want to go with life. And again, what your field is, because, you know, an H-index of 7 or an H-index of 12 might be very respectable in your field, and depending upon, you know, your longevity in the field. So that was just a little side note there. I'm going to go back to profiles again. So we were talking about metrics. Does anybody have a Google Scholar or a Google profile? So I'm seeing at least 3 people in the room, maybe a couple of others have one. So if you would go to, you don't need the screen anymore. Okay, I'm gonna go to Scholar. Oops, I have to spell it correctly. So if you go to Google Scholar, if you search on a person's name, so for example, you could search on Sergei Kopygin, you could search on, if you have a professor or a colleague in your field you want to search on. And I have to look up how to spell his name, so I have to change the page. Excuse me for not having the page right. Okay. So if you search on the person's name and type it correctly, you should, and they have a profile, so that's the key thing. So you can see that he does have a profile, and if you click on that, it'll actually come up with it. So similar to the ORCID, but this one is one that you would create in Google Scholar. You can affix you have a picture sent to it. You can have some key terms of disciplines, areas that specialties you study in, have your email, and then you can have the articles, the works that you've published. And you can see that they also rank it by cited by. And on the right-hand side, you can see that there's the citations, like how many citations he's had, and what his H-index is according to Google Scholar's calculations, which you'll notice if you looked at the numbers are different. So if you're quoting so the take home on that is that if you're giving an H-index, you want to say, well, where did it come from? So, I mean, your department or your institution might have a standard and say it's got to come from Scopus. Or we only do Google Scholar. And so then it's just a given because you pull it from there. But if it's not, you would say, H-index Google Scholar, H-index Scopus, so you would just chart it that way. Because they do pull different resources. For Scopus, you could go into Scopus and you could get a list of what they're pulling from. They'll have a list of the journals that they index and the works they're pulling from and how they actually get to this. Google Scholar, we can only guess at because we know that they pull in the data from PubMed, they work with associations, professional associations, and pull it in, but we don't know specifically which ones, and we don't know specifically what their algorithm is. So you kind of have to trust that they're doing it well. They do have the I-10 index, which is the number of publications with 10 or more citations within the last 5 years. So that's a rolling number. It's not accumulating, like your H-index accumulates. So theoretically that number could go up and down, or down, up and then down, but
I might add that I just read yesterday about a new metric called the S index, which is counting your self-citations. Because an article came out, I forgot if it was in Nature, it was in one of the big publications, I think it was Nature, that was a big study's come out kind of about self-citations and whether it's good or bad, and they end up saying it depends, that you do have to cite your previous work because a lot of times you do, because you're building, your future articles are building on your past work, so you do have to cite your own work some, but they were picking out people who had really excessive self-citations, and so they were saying, well, maybe we need this S index to sort of point those people out, but we'll see. That just came out yesterday, so we'll see where that goes.
Thanks. I haven't heard of that, and that would be an example of a number where you don't want it to
That's
get
right. You
too
don't want it to get too high.
Okay, so I'm not going to take too much. I mean, you can see this. It's pretty much, it's a profile site. This is one that's totally optional, up to you, but we recommend it because Google's pretty ubiquitous, pretty prevalent around the world. And you have control over it. So if you want to create one, if you're looking at somebody else's, you see it says get my own profile on the right. Or you can always go back to, if I've been back one screen, or a couple of screens, up here it says my profile. And if you click on it and you don't have one, it'll say you can either log in if you have a Google account, or you can click, and you can click create account to get a Google account and then go through and create a profile. So given what else we want to talk about today, we're not going to walk through and have you do that like we did with the ORC, but if you want to, feel free to set one up. It does not automatically pull data. You have to go, well, actually, I think it does. It does, actually, I got that flipped. It does automatically pull data. So you can actually just go through and make sure it's clean or it's correct. One thing that can happen is your profile can stop showing up. Like mine doesn't show up anymore if you Google me. And nor we have a professor in informatics whose name has also, their profile stopped. And we can't figure out why this is happening. And yes, they are set to public. So you have to set your profile to public. and then when somebody Googles your name, it'll come up. But like anything, sometimes things break. But we're trying to fix that problem. But just FYI. So I might end up just going back and recreating them and see if I can do that. Because I haven't gotten any satisfaction.
Okay, let's see. We won't say much more on profiles other than if you go back to the guide, you'll see there's a lot of profiles we didn't cover. There's ResearchGate, Humanities Common, academia.edu. These are all social networking sites for particular researchers in particular fields, and it's really up to you whether you want to join one of these networks, you know, and whether you find it beneficial or not. Certainly they're worth trying out, but your profile is mainly for just within that social networking site. If you publish books, you might want to create an Amazon author page to get your information out on Amazon. If you get into NIH grants, you'll get a bio sketch and so forth.
One thing about creating profiles is that, you know, as Janice has said, there's many, many different profiles. So you don't want to create so many that you can't keep them up, or that becomes your full-time job. So that's why we're focusing on just a couple.
And I would say if you're just doing a couple, ORCID, check your Scopus profile once a year, once you start publishing articles and have a Scopus profile. And then Google Scholar, because it's a nice way to sort of publicly get your name out there. Those would be the three I would concentrate. And yeah, if you're doing a book, I would, and it's kind of book that Amazon would cover, then I would do a little thing on Amazon too. And Amazon pretty much let you create whatever you want to for your page. Okay, let's quickly go over a few more things. Actually, I think it's you.
Oh, okay. So back to me. All right, so now I get to talk about, so you have your profile and you have your publications, your H-index. What do you do with your materials? So I'm going to talk about a couple of repositories. So I am going to go, you should have it on your, okay, it actually remembered. So, all right, so yeah. So we have a repository here at MU called MOspace. So it's mospace.umsystem.edu because it's actually for all 4 campuses. It's not just for MU. So if you have work that you want to put somewhere that you have the rights to, so that's one thing to think about when, you know, before you sign away agreements, or if you're working with colleagues, think, how much of this do we want to keep the rights of? And it's like, well, I want to be able to put it in MOspace or use it in my class or put it up on a website. Because you can put information, students can put information in here, faculty, staff. So if you've given a poster, you can put your poster in here. You can put conference papers in here. Now, if you have big data, I'm probably not going to put, you know, the working data in here. This is more like the published information, the information that would be presented at a conference, in a journal article, etc., in a book. So you can also put data sets in here. So the information will be given its own URL. So you can have it on your portfolio. You could have this website linked on your other sites. You could have it on your CV. And I wanted to see, like if I look at the Hunger Atlas, so you can search across the database or you can browse through it. So there is the Missouri Hunger Atlas, and I'll go with the I'm selecting the Kansas City 2010 Hunger Atlas. And so if you look at it, they have a PDF, so you can actually pull down the data. You get an abstract about it. You can see here's the URI, so they find it. And then they have statistical information. So it'll show, since we're talking about metrics and alternative metrics, so it shows how many downloads they've had, how many item views, and who's looking at it by country, and then how many views per month and downloads per month. So you can track that. So not only is it a place to store your works, but it also tracks usage, and it also gives you a static URL that you can use to share it, push it out by Twitter. Be proud of your work. And how is this found? This database, MOspace, is actually crawled by Google. So information in here should be, if somebody Googles it, they should be able to find it. It's also indexed by at least another database called BASE, B-A-S-E, which is out of Germany. So they crawl a lot of repositories. How to submit works. So if you click on the upper right, you can come in here or come to this site and it'll give you directions on how to submit. So you have to be a current affiliate with one of the 4 campuses or the system. And well, actually I'm only seeing Columbia and Kansas City, but my understanding was.
Well, they're using different systems.
Oh, okay. So Hansel, and I stand corrected, literally stand corrected.
They could use this before.
Okay. Okay, so, and so it gives you the directions on how to download it. If you have any questions or problems with that, you can always give us a shout and contact us, and we have a contact link right down here at the bottom. And I mentioned that I searched it, but you could also browse through it. I'm not going to take the time to go through that because I want to show there are many repositories, depositories to save your information in. So this is our campus system one. There's another one called Figshare. Why it's called Figshare, I have not explored. I'm not sure why they named it that. This one is a freemium for meaning that there's a certain amount that's free, and then you can pay to have more space. So this is one that's well used. So we could look at the flying insects, I guess, but I wanted to look up monkeys in math. Just because I like finding, so here's a collection of information. So looking at monkeys and college students and who does well with basic math. So, and you can see that Figshare actually uses the Altmetrics company. Thank you. I was like, how do the Altmetrics logging? So you can see how they actually track the information and the usage of it. And you can follow this. You can see how it's categorized. Here's their URL, how to cite it, and then here's their data that you could download and track, and you have the contact information for the authors. There are sites that, let's see, my notes. PLOS, we've mentioned that journal, and they're listed right here. They actually have a listing. If you go to PLO, if you just Google PLOS recommended repositories, they'll have a list of recommended repositories. And also the National Network of Libraries has a list of repositories. So a lot of times there might be one that you need to use for your field. So we would love it if you used MOspace, but we also understand that depending on which funding you get or what field you're in, there might be a repository that you have to put your information in. So it's kind of like everything, it's field dependent. And speaking of being able to share your data and whether you can actually post a whole paper in one of these repositories, or if you have to make use of, like in MOspace, you can actually say, I want to put my data in here, but don't make it viewable for 12 months. Put an embargo on it, or put it behind a wall for 12 months because of my copyright, or what have you, depending on what you sign. So I am going to go to, I can't type and talk. I've been trying for years to learn how to type and talk. Has anybody heard of Romeo Sherpa? Probably not. This is actually a very useful site because it looks at publisher copyright policies and self-archiving. So if you're considering publishing in a journal, so if you're looking around, you have a paper, you want to publish it, you can come to this site and you can put in the different journal titles and you can see what types of licenses do they do. So for example, if I put in American Sociological, thank you. So if I put in American Sociological Review, they have it color coded, which some people like and some people absolutely hate, but they do have down here, if you scroll down, what those color codes mean. And they'll spell it out up here, like you can put in your preprint, your pre-refereeing article, your pre-refereeing manuscript, but you can't put in the publisher's PDF. So that gives you an idea of what their agreements are going to be and how hard you might need to negotiate if you wanted to try to change that. And so you can easily search through different journal titles. So that might be something that you want to. There's a sister database to this called Sherpa Juliet. You can see their theme going on here, Romeo and Juliet there. That one actually allows you to check your funders policy. So if you're going for grant funding from NIH or somewhere else, which repository you would need to fund? Do you need to share your data publicly? And if so, is there a specific repository you need to use? So you can find that if you go to their homepage or if you Google Sherpa Juliet to get to that. And so that wraps it up. And Janice, do you have any final words?
Well, I'll say just a few things. We've got a couple
Closing
minutes.
words, I should say.
Well, I'll talk just a couple minutes about journals. I mean, one way to get to make sure your research has impact is to get your articles published in highly ranked journals. The ranking system that's been used the most are the impact factors. People have heard of impact factors, journal impact factors. Again, this is just a number that's assigned to a journal, and it's based on sort of the average number of times an article is cited in that journal over a couple of years. I thought we'll look real quick. A place to find, well, this information is, impact factors are assigned by the Web of Science people. And it's based on the articles that are cited in their database. That's the data that they're using. And we've got a resource which is on our guide. It's called Journal Citation Index. And this index, whoops. Get it. Oh man, let's see. Yeah, journal reports, sorry. I was calling it slightly by its wrong name, Journal Citation Reports. And you can look up the name of the journal. Let's do Journal of Forestry, just for an example. And this will tell you that the impact factor for this journal for 2018 is 1.980. So that basically means articles in that journal are cited on the average 2 times a piece. And you go, well, is this good? How does this compare? And what you really need to do is see what the best journal in forestry, what the impact factor is for that journal, and see the other journals in this subject area, what their impact factors are. And to see that, the easiest thing to do is go to all years, and which gives you more information than you ever wanted to know about this journal. But at the bottom of this chart is rank. And when you click on the rank, it will tell you that this journal is ranked number 19 out of 67 journals that are in forestry, in the category forestry, and that puts them in the second quartile. Now, really, any journal that has an impact factor is considered a good journal, because not all journals get impact factors. It's the journals that Web of Science considers to be their core titles. And I forget how many that is. It is thousands of titles, but not every journal in forestry is going to have an impact factor. So just the fact that it has one makes it a good journal. And then in fact, if it's in the first or second quartile, it's a really good journal. But to see journals in the different categories, if you come back, which is what? Quartile, it means it's in the top 25%. The second quartile would be in the top 50%. Yeah. Okay, let's go back. Let's do spring forestry. We can browse by category and down. Here we go. Select categories. You can browse through the categories that they have. We'll go ahead and look at forestry first, and then look at another one just for comparison's sake. Let's come down. Here we go. Check that off, and then I have to come down to the bottom of the page and click submit. And there's 67 journals assigned to the forestry subject area. And if I click on those 67, I'll see that the top journal in this area has an impact factor of 4.189. And you can see other journals. So these are nice lists to sort of see what are considered top journals in particular field, for one thing. And just see, you probably starting out would not be able to get into one of the top journals, but you never know. But further down, you may be able to get into one of these journals. And of course, they're not all are going to be focused on what your research is. So let's just do for comparison real quick. I'm going to get rid of forestry. Oops. Get rid of forestry. And we're going to look at cell biology, because the impact factors of journals is all dependent on how many researchers are in a field and how much they cite each other's work. And in forestry, there's, a limited number of researchers. They're going to cite themselves some, but not a tremendous amount. Cell biology, on the other hand, it's going to have a lot of researchers in it, and they cite each other a lot. So we're going to look at that one real quick. And you'll see the top one has an impact factor of 43. So that's a big difference. So you can't just look at an impact factor and tell if it's at the top of its field or not. You really have to look within a field to see whether that impact factor is good or really good. But as I said, if it has an impact factor, it's considered good. And let's see. It doesn't really tell you up at the top, but and in cell biology, there's not quite 200 journals. So there's a lot more journals in cell biology than in forestry, and they're cited a lot more than forestry. But if you're the top journal in forestry, you're still a top journal, even though you may not have an impact factor of 43. So impact factors are something to be aware of. I would say almost all publishers will list the latest impact factor if they have one on their website, because it's considered, you know, a point of prestige to have an impact factor. So you can often just look at a publisher's website to see what the impact factor is. And a lot of them now, particularly probably if they're ranked highly, are listing their rank in the category too. Probably the ones toward the bottom of the rankings are probably not listing or highlighting that. So you may have to look at journal citation reports to get that particular information. But certainly, you know, trying to get articles published in these, you know, highly ranked journals will help, you know, increase your impact. So that was really, impact factors really quick. Any questions about impact factors? They are, you know, somewhat controversial because just because articles are cited doesn't necessarily mean they're great articles. It could be the research is controversial and people are citing them because they're saying this is not really good research. So like everything, you have to take.
And those people with a high S index of self-citation.
That's right, yeah. Just because you're cited a lot, if you have a lot of self-citations, that's a little. So you sort of have to look at the big picture. You can't just look at one metric in isolation.